What's up, everybody? Today I wanted to talk about the American Chiller book series. Now, these are books written by Jonathan Rand, which is a pen name for Christopher Wright, and this series was started in about 2001, and it's essentially another Goosebumps knockoff series, but this one is a little bit more different than the last book series I did a video about, which were the Shivers books. So these ones come a little bit later. The Shivers books, along with a lot of the other Goosebumps knockoff series, were released shortly after Goosebumps got its rise to fame, and these ones come out a little bit later, and these books were actually self-published. This was not published by a big company or anything like that. This author just started writing these books, and when they got rejected, he just decided to try self-publishing them, and it turned out to be a pretty somewhat successful series. So basically, this American Chiller series is he writes about a monster or ghosts or whatever, like something supernatural or horror related, and he comes up with one for each state. So I'll go through and show you my collection I have here. These were all books that I've had since I was a kid. The first one is Florida Fog Phantoms. This is book number 3 in the series. Next one I have is Wisconsin Werewolves, book number 7. Book number 8, Minnesota Mall Mannequins. 13, Virtual Vampires of Vermont. And number 17, South Carolina Sea Creatures. So I used to have a lot more of these books when I was younger, and I think I just ended up giving a lot of them away. These are the only ones I still have. So one thing about this series is it's a lot more tame than most of the other middle grade horror books series that I've read. It doesn't ever get quite as dark or as graphic as some of the Goosebumps books do, and definitely not as dark as the Shivers books. These ones are a lot more age appropriate for the most part, and just more friendly and charming, and never reaching quite the level of scares that those other books do. One thing I would like to mention too is I actually got to meet the author, Jonathan Rand. When I was young, I went to a book signing and I got to meet him, and that was really cool. That was super exciting for me at the time when I did that. And I actually have his signatures on some of these books. And then on one of them here that he signed for me, he wrote, hopefully you guys can see that, he wrote, "Chill out, Austin." So yeah, as you guys can probably tell, I have a lot of fond memories with these books. These books, along with Goosebumps, were kind of my gateway into horror when I was younger. I just really loved reading these. They really just sparked my imagination. I don't know. These books I really got into, and as I got older, I just kind of stopped reading them. And this is my first time rereading them as an adult, so I wanted to see how they held up over time, see if they can compare to Goosebumps, see what they're like now. So yeah, let's talk about them a little bit. So the two I decided to reread were Wisconsin Werewolves and Florida Fog Phantoms. These two were always my favorite of the American Chillers books when I was younger, especially Wisconsin Werewolves. But the first one I decided to read was this one, Florida Fog Phantoms. And when I started reading this book, I just had a rush of memories come back to me. So much nostalgia. I just have so much sentimental value for this book. So I will say I do look upon these books with a lot of bias, but I still had a fun time reading these. I don't think they stand the test of time quite as well as Goosebumps do. They're definitely much more like amateurish, the writing anyway. I can kind of see why these books weren't accepted by a publishing company and he went the route of self-publishing, because they're just not as well written. The writing style is just not great. There's not a lot of talent here. There's one thing too that I found very annoying is these books have a lot of those signature like cliffhanger type endings that are very common in children's literature or horror literature, I guess. But here they're a lot more annoying than they are in Goosebumps or some of the other ones. Whereas in Goosebumps, a lot of the time they're a bit more organic feeling. In these ones, they feel very forced and are just kind of annoying. For example, one cliffhanger type ending we see a lot, and not just this one, but all of these American Chillers books, is the main character simply states, and I know something very bad was about to happen, or you wouldn't believe what happened to us next. Just things like that, and it's just kind of annoying, and it really does nothing to create suspense. It's kind of there to create suspense and try to keep you reading, but it's just a very odd way of going about it and doesn't really work in my opinion. So, where was I? Florida Fog Phantoms. I did have a fun time reading this book. Excuse me guys, I'm really tired right now. I always film these videos at the worst time, early in the morning or super late at night when I'm tired. But yeah, this book has a very simple premise. Basically, the main character, Justin, living in Florida, not a tsunami, but hurricane or tsunami or something, I don't remember, rolls in. And then afterwards, after the storm ends, there's this huge fog that just covers his neighborhood. This very thick fog. You can't see anything. It's described very well, actually. And basically, his neighbor's dog runs out into the fog and they have to go and try to find her. And then his little sister was out playing in the fog too, and she decides to be a brat and run away. And so Justin and his friend go to try to find them and bring them back in, and they get lost in the fog. And then they discover that there's creatures that are made of this fog that live within the fog, and if the creatures touch them, they will turn into one of the fog people and will live in this mist for the rest of their lives and be trapped inside of it. So, very simple premise, nothing very special, a pretty thin story, but it works pretty well. Like, this book actually has its moments of suspense. Now again, a lot of it is just nostalgia for me, and me kind of getting back into that mindset of reading it again for the first time when I was a kid, and remembering that suspense and fear and tension I felt when I was reading this at 11 years old, or however old I was when I first read this. But I do think out of all of the American Chillers books, out of all the ones I've read anyway, this is probably the most solid book in the series. It's just a lot more well written, very tightly paced compared to the others. There's really not a dull moment in here. During their little trip through the fog, as they try to figure out how to get back home and to find their dog and his little sister, they run into various animals made of the fog, including a whale, a shark, a panther, and then there's this creepy old man that's stalking them through the fog and trying to turn them into one of the fog people. So, again, the premise is very simple and basic, but I don't know, it just works. This one's very tightly paced. It doesn't take long at all to jump into the action. They're out in the fog and lost and can't find their way home within the first few chapters. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Again, these books don't stand the test of time nearly as well as Goosebumps do, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to anyone. Like I said, these books just kind of hold a special place in my heart personally, but if you were to check out a book from the American Chillers series, I would recommend maybe starting with this one. So, the next book in the series that I read was Wisconsin Werewolves, and this one, I believe I already mentioned it, was one of my favorites along with Florida Fog Phantoms. And this one has a little bit more of a complex plot to it. Basically, our main character comes across this werewolf when he and his friends are playing hide and seek out in the woods one night. And he tells all of his friends about it. Of course, they don't believe him. And then he gets one of his friends to believe them, I think. And then he essentially goes on this journey to try to prove the existence of this werewolf, and also try to figure out what is going on exactly. Who is this werewolf? There's some annoying fake out stuff in here too. Some tropes that we've seen before in other middle grade horror stuff. There's one really annoying dream sequence in here that's supposed to lead the reader to believe that it's actually happening, this werewolf thing, and then it turns out to just all be a dream. It only goes on for one chapter, thankfully, but it's just very annoying because it's an overused trope in children's horror that we've seen a lot of times before in some Goosebumps books and other middle grade horror stuff. Thankfully, we do eventually get to some real werewolves in this book later on, and there's still this kind of mystery aspect surrounding who the werewolf is. Unfortunately, with a slightly more complex book, or complex plot that this book has. It raises a lot of unanswered questions. There's some gaps in the story as far as logic is concerned, and just not everything really ties together and makes complete sense. The story itself is not entirely coherent, but again, like Florida Fog Phantoms, I just kind of had a rush of memories come back to me when I was rereading this book, and I still had fun with it, even if it's not something I necessarily enjoyed all that much. I just don't think these books have the timeless value or nature to them like the Goosebumps books do. For me, Goosebumps books will reign supreme as the ultimate children's horror series. But these ones still have a little bit of charm to them, a little bit of personality. These ones are quite a bit different than Goosebumps books are. That's why I'm a little bit hesitant to say it's a knockoff series, even though I kind of already did. These ones are just a lot different than most other middle grade horror series I've read. But yeah, Wisconsin Werewolves, I didn't enjoy this time around quite as much as Florida Fog Phantoms. It was still a decent book. Definitely one of the better American Chiller series books. When I was younger, I believe I read the first 20 of them, and I think that's when it started going downhill, is like around the 20 book mark of that series. And I don't have a copy with me, but I did try reading the newest book in the series, which is book number 44, and it was horrible. I do not recommend reading it at all. The contrast between the newer books in the series and these older ones is just ridiculous. There is such a noticeable difference in the actual quality of writing and storytelling. Like, it's not even funny. I believe I almost said R.L. Stine. I believe Jonathan Rand may be experiencing some writer's fatigue as he's been working on this series now for 20 years. Or maybe he just doesn't quite care as much and he just wants to finish the series for the sake of it. But yeah, the newest one I read was horrible. The title of it was Arkansas Algae Monsters, and I do not recommend reading that one at all. Like I said, if you are a little bit curious about this series and you maybe want to check it out, I would start with Florida Fog Phantoms and maybe go from there. But I wouldn't necessarily say these books are great. As I've already mentioned, they're definitely not the best written. They were rejected by publishing companies and he had to self-publish these. And they did grow somewhat successful. He's been writing them and made a living off it all these years. So I wanted to mention something else too. I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah. One thing that's cool about this series is each book ends with the protagonist meeting the main character of the next book in the series, and essentially the main character from the next book in the series at the end of this one or whatever will tell the character about their experience of Minnesota Mall mannequins or the virtual vampires or whatever it was that they went through. So it's kind of neat how the author transitions each book in the series into the next one. And even though I don't really care to keep up with this series and read all of them, I'm kind of curious to see how it will end with the final book. I'm thinking maybe it will end with the main character meeting the main character from the very first book in the series and just kind of have it loop around and just keep going on forever. So it's just kind of an interesting thing he does, and I would like to see how he ends the last book, and I may pick up a copy of that final book whenever he gets around to writing it. But yeah, this series has been going on for 20 years now. Like I said, I believe it started in 2001, so that averages out to be like a little over 2 books a year, I think. So but yeah, I think that's about it for these American Chillers books, guys. I only have 5 of them here in my collection. Like I said, I used to have a lot more of these when I was a kid, and I think I just ended up getting rid of them. These books I will forever hold on to because these ones are signed. And then the one he wrote, Chill Out Austin, for me. So even though these books aren't the best, I wouldn't necessarily recommend them, but they hold a very special place in my heart. Great memories reading these as a kid. And I still had some fun with Florida Fog Phantoms. And yeah, that's about all I have to say for this series, guys. So thanks for watching. If you have read any of these American or Michigan Chiller books, I forgot to mention that series too. That was another series he did, which is essentially the same thing as this one, but they take place only in the state of Michigan, with each book representing a certain city or town in Michigan instead of a state of each for the country or whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. But if you've read any of these books, let me know what your favorite one is down in the comments below. So that's about it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.